Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Tuesday. We've got another great show for you today. Let's get right to it. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is apparently drowning. It's running low on money and on staff. This news comes as a once-in-a-century hurricane, Hurricane Milton, is barreling towards Tampa, Florida. Now, only 9% of FEMA personnel are available to respond to Hurricane Milton or other disasters that may arise. Still, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas insisted that FEMA has sufficient resources. When asked about this report, here is what he told MSNBC's Jen Psaki on Monday night. Let's watch.
Everybody should rest confident that FEMA has the resources. We already have 900 personnel deployed, pre-positioned in Florida, people who were responding to Hurricane Helene, people who were responding previously to Hurricanes Idalia and Debbie. We are there. We have search and rescue teams. The Army Corps of Engineers are there. We are ready. We have the personnel. FEMA likes to say it is FEMA flexible. We can respond to multiple events at a single time.
I guess proof will be in the pudding. But for context, 1/4 of the agency's staff was available to jump into action and help at this point in the hurricane season for the last 5 years. In 2017, when the U.S. was pummeled with three devastating storms, Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria, FEMA's reserves were at 19%. With this latest report, many questions linger about the agency's capability to respond through the end of the hurricane season, which will last until November 30th. The GAO, a nonpartisan congressional watchdog, released a report last year on FEMA's funding, concluding that it needed to improve hiring data and staffing gaps. GAO examined data from 2019 through 2022 and determined the agency needed to increase disaster workforce. The target had been set to boost disaster response personnel to 17, that is 670 by 2024, but that target has been pushed back to 2026. Meanwhile, Speaker Mike Johnson slammed the federal response to Hurricane Helene that killed over 200 people after devastating the southeast of the country. Here he is on Fox News Sunday with Shannon Bream. Take a look.
At the federal level, this has been a massive failure, and you could just ask the people there on the ground. I have been there. I was in Georgia. I was in Florida, where Hurricane Helene made landfall. They're on the coast, and then we'll be going to the hardest hit parts of North Carolina on Wednesday of this week. When you talk to the people who are directly affected, they will tell you that this has been an abject failure. FEMA has lost sight of its core mission, I think, in so many cases, and the administration has not shown that they were prepared for this.
Meanwhile, Johnson signaled he wouldn't call the House back to Washington as pressure grows for Congress to provide more funding for FEMA. Lawmakers are due back after the election. That may change, as President Biden said this morning. He is canceling his trip overseas so he can monitor the storm from the White House. There's so much to unpack here because there's the funding conversation that Mayorkas has stated and FEMA has stated that the funding won't run out, at least right now for this hurricane. Then there's the funding conversation about how the House didn't pass, it did pass, but many Republicans didn't want to vote in favor of expanding funding of FEMA in the spring, and there are more hurricanes happening. And then there's just the staffing issue where there's turnover because, surprise, disaster relief is very stressful, and there's been massive turnover with more storms that have been on record that they'd have to answer to. I even wrote down, this is wild, I didn't realize how many things were going on right now. Right now, you have FEMA dealing with, in the last 2 weeks, landslides in Vermont, tornadoes in Kansas, there was the storm Debbie in New York and Georgia, a watch fire in Arizona, 100 major other disasters, and only 35% of the positions are filled for that specific type of response. And in some of these situations, only one person is available for disaster survivor assistance out of the 1,201 that are supposed to be, that are on the payroll. 1 out of 50 out of the 50 staffers for Director of Disaster Operations are available as of Monday. 4 out of 2,579 are available for individual assistance. This is a crisis, man.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to argue that the disaster response has not been a disaster itself. I mean, I think a lot of this is government mismanaged because they have a massive budget, they have a massive staff now. Okay. People are going to say, well, they need even more funding and they need even more staff members. You know, that I have some skepticism there because it's like if you're not doing your job well enough, then you should be rewarded with tons of additional funding. I want to, like, how are these funds being spent? Is it possible to just get money to more plugged in on the ground local people to use better, to allocate better than the federal government does, because the federal government seems to have a massive response to localized problems that is not ideal. So I don't know exactly what the problem is here, but FEMA seems to be doing a bad job. Not being prepared in terms of the staffing is a major
burnout.
issue.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think part of it.
Do you understand that, like, oh, we're not doing a good job, increase our funding? Do you know what I mean?
It
seems it's unsatisfying.
But imagine you're a staffer that's normally used to dealing with maybe one hurricane a cycle, and obviously I'm not an expert on staffing procedures at FEMA and how many disasters one person in that department deals with on an annual basis. But it is very clear, as FEMA has stated, that there are more storms and there are more crises and disasters that they're dealing with. So you're getting burned out. Like, it would be like if we had to tape 4 shows in one day, we'd be burned out. We might be the best in the world, which I think we are, but there's a point where you're exhausted. And that is something I think FEMA, if they had more funding, they could potentially bring on more staffers, and those staffers, of course, allocate that money and go out there in the field and help with are on the ground to assist folks, whether it's just filling out the insurance forms or different, bureaucratic things that they have to do, or, handing out water, or setting up locations where people can get food or charge their phones. It's wild what they do. I mean, I was in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, I've told you before, and it is chaos. I mean, it is a totally chaotic thing, and you need to have people there who know how to navigate that chaos, who are trained in it. And some of these communities don't have anybody right now.
Well, FEMA itself is trying to claim that it's misinformation is what's making it so hard to address hurricane victims. And I'm like, I'm getting so tired of this concept. Misinformation is not a disease. It's not a natural disaster. It's a problem that we have always dealt with. The idea that suddenly we are overwhelmed with bad information in a way we never were before is just not factually accurate. It's not historically accurate. People are getting more informed over time. They're getting smarter over time. And people used to believe all sorts of kooky, crazy things. People believe the moon landing's fake. People believe... Right, I mean, and again, some of these kooky, crazy beliefs end up being correct, which is why you can't demonize the entire category of conspiracy theories or all that. I mean, we just interviewed today a guest who has expertise on the CIA's knowledge of what happened with the Kennedy assassination. Again, not saying that the craziest thing anybody thinks about the JFK assassination is correct, but you're right to ask questions, to think that the government knows more than they're letting on. That ends up having kernels of truth. So the idea, I just hate the idea of a government bureaucrat saying, oh, everything would be running perfectly. We'd be really well able to do our jobs if you all would just be like, less active on social media or something. Come on.
I think it has more to do with Donald Trump, who is an anomaly, at least for this era of politics, this modern era of politics. He goes out there and he says to his hundreds of millions of followers on X and Truth Social, and he does them at rallies, and then all of his most loyal fans, MAGA people, regurgitate these things on the ground, and they think they're real. I mean, I'm sure you've been to these rallies or reported on them before. The things that people say, it's wild. So if they think that FEMA's money is going to migrants, which has been proven and fact-checked multiple times as not true, and they did, by the way, do that under his administration.
Right, they used to do that.
Yes.
And then they changed where the funding.
So there's an argument
it's
to be
all,
made
it's all
that Donald
funding,
Trump
so it's
is not...
all, it's all coming from the same source, taxpayers.
Yeah.
And the federal government is apportioning it for different causes. So it doesn't really matter if it's this agency or that.
But if it was allocated, appropriately. I agree. We should be funding, domestic. There's so many things that we should be funding domestically instead of endless wars and contractors and Bibi Netanyahu's urge to stay in power.
Like, Trump is not wrong about it. He said this recently, and I don't disagree with it. Like, we write blank checks for funding for foreign governments, foreign military efforts, and we don't do that for our own people.
And he won't do anything. He already. Newsflash, guys. He already had that opportunity to make a difference when he was president, and he ain't going to do it again. He's not going to fund anything, except his contracts to build high-rise apartments in Dubai or something.
Well, if he can build those with his own money, I don't care about that. I just don't want to use taxpayer dollars for any of it. I just want to write a check back to the American people for the amount they paid in to this stupid system. More Rising right after this. Former Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton has called for the repeal of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Section 230 protects online platforms from being held liable for third-party content, which makes the internet work. like user content on social media. Watch her comments.
We should be, in my view, repealing something called Section 230, which gave platforms on the internet immunity because they were thought to be just pass-throughs, that they shouldn't be judged for the content that is posted. But we now know that that was an overly simple view, that if the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter X or Instagram or TikTok, whatever they are, if they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control. And it's not just the social and psychological effects, it's real harm.
Now, for free speech absolutists like myself, repealing Section 230 would result in censorship. Many users erupted over this on X, writing, quote, "The key word here is control. This is how communists talk." She said the quiet part out loud. I don't think she was supposed to do that. I thought the whole point of freedom was not to be controlled. Shouldn't she be in jail already? But I do think repealing Section 230 is a terrible idea. Now, one that unfortunately many Republicans have joined Democrats in calling for. Hillary Clinton is far from the first political figure to suggest this. This is a popular idea from Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders as well, and also Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and many Republicans. Everybody likes the idea, for some reason, of giving Congress more control over what you can say on social media. I think this would be a terrible idea, because imagine if that's how it worked. If you could sue, let's talk YouTube. We're a YouTube-based show. If YouTube could be sued for things people say on YouTube, then they wouldn't work. They wouldn't allow you to post at will. They would have to vet the content. That would end our show and all YouTube-based commentary and all commentary on Twitter and on Facebook as we know it. Hillary Clinton knows that. She doesn't like the commentary because it's very anti-her. And so that's what she's proposing. And Republicans would be fools to go along with it because it would end up limiting their speech primarily.
Are you ready for this?
Go ahead.
Robby, can you believe what I'm about to say?
I don't know. What are you?
I agree with you.
Oh, how about that? How nice.
I agree with you. I think that the tech companies have an obligation as good companies that supposedly represent the public space and square, the town square, and they're not fulfilling that obligation of having more moderation and getting rid of the fake accounts and cleaning up the algorithms, as we've discussed. Social media is a drug. I really think it's a drug. I'm not saying YouTube is a drug, but I think social media has become dangerous, and that was really the context of what she was talking about. Was it's become a threat to a lot of young people's health. Suicide has gone up, mental health issues have gone up. We know these things, right? And Section 230 did give the internet immunity from civil lawsuits. And that is there for a reason. I also find it fascinating that Hillary Clinton is talking about this, and she specifically says, these were supposed to be pass-throughs. She basically makes an argument for Julian Assange. That is what he claimed Wikipedia or WikiLeaks were when they released, Edward Snowden's files. And she was always opposed to that argument. So essentially, she just said what we all know, which is Julian Assange was using the platform as a pass-through, as a journalist would do. So I find it fascinating that, it's not just that she said the quiet part out loud, it's that she's basically admitting the whole time,
Right.
They were wrong.
And if somebody says something false about you, you can still, on the internet, on a social media platform, you can still go after that person. Mm-hmm. You just can't go after the platform. And that is an important distinction, because we should center, blame on the most relevant party. Blaming the platform, and again, that starts to get ridiculous. Like, no one thinks that, if I call you up on the phone and I say something defamatory about you, that we can sue Verizon or something like that. That's the equivalent of doing it to some degree on Facebook or Twitter or anything like that. All right, we're agreeing, but I am going to pick a fight with you anyway now on the mental health aspect of it.
Yeah.
So I certainly agree that social media can be bad for some people's mental health under some circumstances, obviously. Just like anything, it is addictive for some people, and addictive things, be it alcohol, drugs, gambling, etc. Actually, gambling is the best example, because the overwhelming majority of people can go to the casino, have a little bit of fun, spend some money, and not, bet the farm and the house and the wedding ring and their college kids' tuition. A small minority of people cannot do that. They're addicts for gambling, and it's very bad for them. But I'm not for making policy on the level of like the human being who is most outside the bounds ill-affected by the thing. So that's why I'm very hesitant, similarly, to regulate social media on that basis. I do think parents are right to limit their kids' time on the platform, just like my parents were right to limit, how much Nintendo 64 I played when I was a kid. But the problem does not seem fundamentally different from that.
Well, there's age limits on drinking, driving. Well, you don't get addicted to driving. I hope not, at least. Drinking, gambling. There are age limits on these.
But
things.
The age limit on social media, I would just say, is when your parents think you're able to use it, right?
But not every parent, as you know, is available at all times, or the best parent. Let's be honest. There is an addiction, and it is driving radicalization up for sure. There are people who prey on young people. Of course, it's predatory sexual predators out there, and you can't monitor. Any parent knows that. Even if you're the best parent in the world, these kids are so sneaky. Like, they create multiple accounts, they have secret chats, they can there's all sorts of things out there that they're doing to circumnavigate their parents' supervision and, frankly, the company's supervision. That's why, in New York City and New York State, and California as well, they're going to be banning social media and cell phones in schools during class time, which I think is right, honestly.
Yeah, I don't think it should be done by the state. I think I would leave that policy to the schools. I think this might be a good policy. There's no evidence that it works yet because it hasn't been tried. I think the best thing would be to start with schools experimenting with that. Because also you do want access to a phone if there's an emergency. So
they said that they could still
put
remember
the phone
when we were
in
kids? Remember we just went downstairs?
Phones.
Yeah, I went downstairs, front office, would tell my parents I was sick when I wasn't, so they could pick me up, or sometimes I'd go on a payphone, or I would just sit in front of the school waiting for my parents to pick me up for hours when they forgot me.
Yeah, I think they put the phones in, have them in the classroom, put them in a little mailbox or something inside the classroom when you go in.
I think that's what they're doing.
Yeah, to the same extent, obviously, a phone has, we wouldn't allow, it would be crazy to expect that you could play a Game Boy or a Nintendo Switch during class, right? So similarly, it would be crazy to think you should just be on your phone the whole time. And I absolutely think schools should, again, it's not on the level of state intervention for me, but I think schools should try that out and see how it works.
And I think, again, back to the platforms, I don't think that these platforms should be held liable for, if you say something defamatory against the president. You can't control millions and millions of people. You can have moderators. They need to have better moderators. They need to have better, oversight of hate crimes.
But the kind of moderation Hillary Clinton wants is you don't get to say anything bad about Hillary Clinton.
That's true.
So that's why it has to be.
I will be first on her
and
list.
And it'll be Republicans too. The left has been threatened also by moderation on social media. Of course, our Republicans and Democrats get together, they'd form some committee where you can never say anything bad about your government if this law was even to be tweaked. There are improvements.
They're not going to do it though. They take so much money from tech. You know that. They're not going to do it.
Well, I hope not. All right, we've got a lot more coming up on Rising. Stay tuned. Kamala Harris is doing some interviews. How about that? Not hostile or confrontational interviews. She was on The View today discussing how her and Biden differ or don't differ. She responded to Donald Trump's comments on Hurricane Helene and now Milton. Let's watch.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact. Yeah. The work that we have done, for example, capping the cost of insulin at $35 a month for our seniors is something I care deeply about allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices and bring the cost of prescription medication down for seniors, but my intention is to expand that for all Americans. Mm-hmm. The work we have done to invest in American industries, whether it be in terms of manufacturing and creating almost 800,000 new jobs around manufacturing. Those were all a shared priority. And the idea that somebody would be playing political games for the sake of himself, but this is so consistent about Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. He puts himself before the needs of others. I fear that he really lacks empathy on a very basic level to care about the suffering of other people and then understand the role of a leader is not to beat people down, it's to lift people up.
On Monday night, she appeared on CBS News. 60 Minutes correspondent Bill Whitaker grilled the vice president on tough topics she's been able to avoid so far, such as the economy and immigration. Here was one testy exchange.
There was an historic flood of undocumented immigrants coming across the border the first 3 years of your administration. As a matter of fact, arrivals quadrupled from the last year of President Trump. Was it a mistake to loosen the immigration policies as much as you did?
It's a long-standing problem. And solutions are at hand. And from day one, literally, we have been offering solutions.
What I was asking was it a mistake to kind of allow that flood to happen in the first place?
I think the policies that we have been proposing are about fixing a problem, not promoting a problem. Okay?
But the numbers did quadruple.
And the numbers
under your
today,
watch.
because of what we have done, we have cut the flow of illegal immigration by half.
But should you
we
have
have
done
cut
that?
the
Should you
flow
have
of
done that?
fentanyl by half, but we need Congress to be able to act.
Whitaker pressed her on another key issue she's provided little clarity on, the economy. Let's watch.
The other economists that have reviewed my plan versus my opponent and determined that my economic plan would strengthen America's economy, his would weaken it.
But
My plan, Bill, if you don't mind, my plan is about saying that when you invest in small businesses, you invest in the middle class.
But pardon me, Madam Vice President, the question was, how are you going to pay for it?
Well, one of the things is I'm going to make sure that the richest among us who can afford it pay their fair share in taxes.
But we're dealing with the real world here.
But the real world includes...
How are you going to get this through Congress?
You know, when you talk quietly with a lot of folks in Congress, they know exactly what I'm talking about because their constituents know exactly what I'm talking about.
60 Minutes extended an invite to Donald Trump to sit down for the network's special election coverage. A long-time tradition going back decades. He backed out of it. Okay, I understand this was not the best interview, the 60 Minutes interview for Kamala Harris. I think simultaneously, as she could have been prepared better for some of the rapid-fire questions she was getting, I also think, you know, does he deserve to be fired? No. Does he deserve to have a DEI person come in and advise him? No. But I think Bill Whitaker's questioning was all framed from the lens of Republican talking points, whether he's even conscious of it or not. You can still ask some of these questions, but the way that he asked them, he framed them, were really coming from the lens of how the Republicans have been going after Kamala Harris. Some of the things she has answered, some she hasn't.
I agree with that, but also the framing of all questions that J.D. Vance gets from mainstream media in the interviews he do are the same way. They are from the Democratic framing. So I'm not going to be shedding any tears that, oh no, she actually got some Republican-centered questions that she responded to somewhere in the ballpark of okay, I would say, especially for her. The real issue, I think, actually comes from the View interview, where she has no real answer for what she would do differently than Joe Biden. But look at Joe Biden's approval ratings. Don't you want to distinguish yourself from your predecessor to some degree, given that he is historically unpopular? And part of that has to do with just Joe Biden's age and what we've seen from him. Yeah. But it also has to do with his policies. There are wide gaps in how Americans feel about Democrats' approach to immigration, the economy, and Republicans. Those are good issues for Trump. So she probably should come up with an answer, one that's not insulting to Joe Biden. Not that anyone in the Democratic Party really cares about Joe Biden's feelings, clearly. That what she would do differently on the border and on immigration. I personally don't love the questions that are along the lines of, but how are you going to do this given Congress, whatever? I mean, those are valid questions, but what is the candidate supposed to say? The reality is, yes, the Congress is controlled by the opposition party, partly. I need total dominance over the entire system to even enact the basic parts of a legislative agenda akin to what Barack Obama had for however many weeks and months he had it. And short of that, I can do nothing, is the honest answer.
I'm going to say something.
It'd be the honest answer for Republicans, too.
I'm going to say something that's probably going to get me in a little bit of hot water. But number one, I think that the Biden-Harris administration has done a very poor job, and this is what people are saying behind closed doors, championing their successes. And I know you may not agree with the successes, but it is their job and it is their communications team to really focus on how to champion their successes, including, the Inflation Reduction Act should have been called a climate bill for the progressives. I know, it should have been,
Well, it didn't reduce inflation, so they might as well call it something else.
But they tried to be a little bit smart in terms of how they, Republicans always say, the Freedom Act or whatever, and it's really something that takes away your freedoms. So number one, I think that they really have a messaging problem. Number two, the honeymoon's over for Kamala Harris, and they should have known that was about to happen. And now what you're seeing, and this is my perspective, is folks who have been around in the same circles advising the last few presidential candidates who really still do not understand in tone, in depth, in their bones what working people are concerned about. And I think that plays out through the candidates in different ways. I think Biden just naturally has a better sense, just one-on-one with voters. I think Kamala does too, but she's not doing great in these kinds of media environments. Obviously, that's probably why they don't put her out there. But it's also their job to do a little work on that. And the vibes are, I'm not saying the vibes are gone, they're just kind of being channeled in different ways. I'm even seeing this online with their social media presence and the types of releases they send out. There was a lot more organic energy a month ago, and they were capitalizing off of that. But now you have this political industrial complex that has jumped into the campaign, and it's becoming a little bureaucratic, and you can feel it. I mean, I can't tell you the crap that I get in my emails from them, oh, look at this great tweet that Kamala Harris said today, and it's so lame. In 1 month, they went from 2008 Obama energy to 2012 Obama energy.
Well, the campaign has entered a steady state where there's nothing, there's no more debates on the horizon. There's no dramatic news taking place. It's kind of settled into a stasis where, depending on how big you think the margin of polling error is going to be, Kamala Harris is either up a little bit or going to lose, and you don't know because it's a genuine unknown. Whether if the polls are dead on, she's probably going to win. If they're off by as much as they were last time, she's probably going to lose. And we have no idea whether to there's nothing exogenous that could, there are things that could happen, but there's no reason to think there's going to be some massive overperformance by her or by him at some future debate. Something in the VP candidates is going to become revealed in a debate they're having. Nothing is bound to happen between now and the election that will fundamentally reshape the race. Now, obviously, things have happened in past cycles. Access Hollywood, Hillary emails, hurricanes, although I don't think hurricanes are going to do enough to
not this time around
politically change the landscape. General dissatisfaction with the federal government's performance does not help Biden-Harris. The longshoreman strike was going to be something that could have hurt, although that seems now to have been resolved.
There is one thing we do know will happen, and this is why I'm going to advocate for shorter elections like they do everywhere else in the world, is that there are consultants who are going to make hundreds of millions of dollars. And these ads that we're watching, they're not the most creative. They're not the Daisy ad. This isn't oh my gosh, you're moving that one voter who would. It's repetitive ads. They're so cookie cutter. They could have been pulled from the 90s on both sides. And I'm just sick of it. I'm tired of this election. I'm sure you are too. I wish the election could happen today because at this point, all that's happening is these guys are making money.
I'm still treated like a Michigan swing voter for some reason, even though I'm not registered to vote in Michigan. So I just get insane messages from both campaigns.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm sick of hearing from it. I like the different tone between Democratic ads and Republican ads. Yeah. Republican ads are don't miss your chance to get the last free golden MAGA hat and join the Trump Love Forever Club. And Democratic ads are the world is ending.
Apocalypse.
A meteor is about to hit us. It is too late to avoid the disintegration of New York, but we could still elect Kamala Harris. If you donate just $5 right now, Robby, it's almost too late.
They called me a really valuable donor today, and I'm I don't know what I bought the hat. That's what I bought.
You bought a hat.
I bought a hat because it was just too cool, and I finally got in the mail.
Oh. Elon has the dark MAGA hat now, the dark Trump hat.
Dark Elon. We
are entering a new era. More Rising right after this.
There's new evidence that the CIA knew of President John F. Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, at least 2 years before he allegedly killed the former commander-in-chief. In a new Substack post, independent journalist and author Jefferson Morley writes about an unnamed source's account of having discovered explosive documents while visiting the CIA Declassification Center.
Morley details how the sources inadvertently came across a JFK file that seemed to show the CIA intended to deceive the House Select Committee on Assassinations, known as the HSCA, as it investigated the JFK assassination. In his post on Substack, Morley writes, quote, "It was a blueprint for how to hide things from the public and how to prevent investigative committees appointed by Congress from seeing documents that might incriminate offices of the government." Imagine that. Here to discuss this revelation is Jefferson Morley, author of several books about the CIA. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, explain it in greater detail. What is the scoop here? What is this room? What is this file? Lay it out for us.
The source who approached me told me about the CIA's file room that they maintain at an office in Herndon, Virginia, and that he had seen this document about the House Select Committee on Assassinations. I've been writing about the CIA for 3 decades. I've been writing about the JFK files since they first started coming out in the 1990s. And this is the most significant story that I've ever run across. Because what it tells us is the CIA is still hiding information related to Lee Harvey Oswald and related to sensitive CIA operations in 1963 around Oswald. Now, what do those operations involve? We don't know because there's so much secrecy involved. But this story gives us a little glimpse behind the curtain. And what it shows us is there are still sensitive CIA operations related to JFK's assassination that are out of public view. And, you know, it's not supposed to be that way. We have a law on the books, very strong, good law.
I was going to say, wasn't there supposed to be this recent declassification of all of the documents relating to that?
That was a product of the 1992 JFK Records Act, which mandated that the government review and release all of its assassination-related material. And over the last 30 years, a whole lot has come into the record, and it's giving us a whole new understanding of the JFK assassination story and the role of the CIA in it.
Is this because this is an issue of national security? I'm sure all of our viewers have probably watched the movies, read the books, seen all the conspiracies online, but there's a question of whether or not the USSR was involved. Obviously, Cuba. There's conversations about the mafia, but you know, oftentimes when they redact information or don't release it, it's a national security issue. Does it still?
Or they say it's a national security
yes,
issue.
Well, then why would you withhold it? You know?
And it was interesting when I asked the CIA for comment, they did not deny anything in this that I reported in this, not about the document and not about the location of the JFK file room. So that gave me more confidence. That gives me a lot of confidence that the story's right. They don't have access to an easy way to deflect this. What we're talking about is something very real. And they use the national security justification to keep this stuff off limits. But, you know, the law is very clear. And when the CIA responded, they said, you know, we've released all the records directly related to the assassination. That's not the law. The law says the government has to release all assassination-related records. And the definition of assassination-related in the 1992 Records Act and in the way it was implemented in the 1990s is very broad, and it includes records directly related to the assassination, but it also includes records indirectly related to the assassination. So what the CIA is saying is, we get to decide which JFK records get made public, and that's wrong. The law is very clear. They don't get to decide. The law decides.
And just to be clear, these are records that predate the assassination, or records of or knowledge of, awareness of Oswald that U.S. authorities might have had because of his trip to Russia, because of his ties to Cuba.
Yes.
That he was on, the theory being he was on their radar, they were paying some level of attention to him, and yet this catastrophe still happened.
And the background to my story is the books that I've written on the CIA, not conspiracy books about the JFK assassination. What the JFK's assassination looked like inside the CIA to the very top people. Nobody cares what Morley's theory is. What top people in the CIA thought, that's really interesting. And this story is another sign that Oswald was very well known to the top level of the CIA. They'd been watching him for 4 years, not 2. From 1959 to 1963, Oswald's whereabouts, his motivations, his political contacts, his personal life were all monitored by top CIA officials. The CIA denied all of this to the Warren Commission and to investigators, and they said, we didn't really know much about him. My story shows that that's just a cover story. They knew a whole lot about him, and they were trying to keep it away from the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which was starting to ask tough questions about, we want to see some of these records of these sensitive operations involving Oswald in 1963. And the CIA was quite hostile. The document that the source described to me shows, the source says, shows that they intended to deceive Congress. They intended not to share all the information at their disposal, and that they were pleased that Congress hadn't figured it out.
So during that time period, Oswald was in Mexico City, where, just a reminder of history, that's where Fidel Castro trained with Che. They were in that cafe, that famous cafe. They would meet every day. I've been there. It's kind of cool. And of course, they trained to invade, Cuba, and of course, it was miserable failure at first, and evolved into a success. Why would Oswald be there training or meeting with them in Cuba? Like, let's just go back and through this theory of why that was significant to the CIA.
Oswald showed up and visited the Cuban consulate and the Soviet embassy in Mexico City about 6 weeks before President Kennedy was assassinated. Both of those facilities were under tight surveillance by the CIA. In the Soviet embassy, there were 2 cameras pointed at the front gate. At the Cuban consulate, there was a pulse camera pointed at the door. So whenever that door opened, they took pictures. Very sophisticated, pervasive, redundant photo surveillance system. Yet the CIA told the Warren Commission, we didn't get any photographs of him.
That just couldn't be true.
No, it's not true. And Wynne Scott, the subject of my first book, wrote in an unpublished memoir that it was not true. He read the Warren Commission, and he said, no, that's not true. We had that embassy totally covered. He was very proud, and he didn't want anybody to think that he had missed a presidential assassin. No, Wynne Scott was a very powerful guy, one of the best CIA stations in the world. He was adamant. And later, 2 CIA people were interviewed by Congress, and they said Wynne Scott had shown them photographs, surveillance photographs of Oswald. So the House Select Committee on Assassinations said in 1979 that the CIA story wasn't true and that the CIA probably had obtained photographs of Oswald. Now, I'll tell you one more thing. I reported last year, I found a guy who worked on that photo surveillance base, a man named Andres Goyenechea. And we figured out his name from some declassified records that were only declassified a year or 2 ago. I found Andres living in Washington State, and he told me the story of this photo surveillance base, which was run by his mother. His mother was the man who manned the camera most of the time. He was a university student at the time. He would come home and relieve her. She would go run her errands or do that. Andres Goyenechea told me that his mother told him, I took Oswald's picture coming and going. No. And she remembered the face very clearly. She attached no significance to it, but Andres said, we knew very well who was an American, who was a Russian, we'd been doing it for years. We knew all the people who worked in that embassy. So after the assassination, when Greta Goyenechea saw Oswald, she told her son, I took his picture coming and going. So that's another nail in the coffin of the CIA's cover story, that we didn't really get a photo of him.
Go ahead.
So I was just going to say, this is, however many years ago the assassination was, now 60 years, and we're still just getting, we haven't gotten all of the information.
It's incredible.
It makes you probably pessimistic about what is going on now. For instance, we have a lot of questions about COVID, or take any subject, COVID origins. There were some assassination attempts against Donald Trump in just the last month. For COVID specifically, there was Congress ordered declassification of a lot of documents. President Biden signed it. What was actually declassified was basically a press release saying we don't really know anything. There's no way that's true. The FBI and the Energy Department have made different So is it going to take 60 or 80 or 100 years? In the Kennedy case, so many of the people who might want to hide something, they're dead by now, and we still can't get the information.
But isn't that because this is, I guess, the big question here that I'm thinking is this just because the CIA messed up and they don't want to show that they had weaknesses, or maybe even people who are aware and look the other way? Related to also, like you had mentioned before we came on, that Nixon had gone after the CIA, that he tried to blackmail them.
Yeah, so, in my third book, which came out in 2022, Scorpion's Dance, Richard Nixon has a very tense meeting with Dick Helms, the director of the CIA, in 1971. And Nixon is bugging Helms for some secret documents about the Bay of Pigs, And like, why is the Bay of Pigs? It was like 10 years after the Bay of Pigs invasion, which failed, as you said. And you hear Nixon on the tape when asked why, he says the "Who Shot John" angle. And he says that to the CIA. Now, Dick Helms understood very well what that meant, which was he was thinking it was at least possible that the CIA was involved, and so he wanted to know more from CIA records about, the CIA's role in the events of 1963. Right after Watergate, when the burglars are arrested, Nixon says to his aides, "Get Helms in here and read him the Riot Act and tell him that if he doesn't get on board with, quashing this story about the White House burglars, it's going to blow up the whole Bay of Pigs thing." Dick Helms blows up because he understands very well that Nixon is blackmailing him and saying, "You go along with me or else something might come out about the CIA and JFK." That is the moment when Richard Nixon and Richard Helms part ways. Up until that point, they had been pretty good partners, but Helms understood after that Nixon was his enemy and that Nixon would resort to something like that to kind of prevail in their personal relations.
Trump and Pompeo.
I think it's often hard to tell whether there's some genuine, they're trying to hide something because there's complicity, or they're so practiced, they being the authority figures in law enforcement and CIA and national security, they're so practiced at deception, they would redact, a grocery store list just out of habit.
Yes.
So it could be because it's not malicious and they're hiding something, they have so much practice at doing that now, it's second nature.
A secret agency is going to keep secrets,
Yeah.
right? And especially sensitive secrets.
Yeah.
So a couple of points. One, the law is very clear. The CIA may say that, but if it's an assassination-related record, it has to be made public. And back to your earlier point, we do have this crisis of legitimacy in government. People just don't believe government statements. And that traces back to the Warren Commission and the, not very credible story that they told about a lone gunman who the CIA knew nothing about. That's a cover story, okay? They knew a lot about him. They followed him all the way around the world, and they followed him right to Dealey Plaza. What was going on? I don't know. I was in kindergarten at the time, right? I mean, and we can speculate, but the point is, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't want to speculate. It's the CIA's job to make the documents available.
Yeah.
And the importance of my story here is they seem not to have done that in this case.
One quick question before we wrap. You mentioned Edward Snowden in this,
Yes.
and can you give us context around that?
Well, there's a live, living person, a JFK whistleblower. So how does he compare to other? Well, he's not a Snowden who went in and copied things and gave the files to reporters. I mean, he's like Snowden in that he's a citizen and he saw something that bothered him and thought that it should come out. So that, in that way. But no, he's not the source is not a Snowden. He's not a Julian Assange who's trying to tear down the world ruling class. He's not a deep throat, a guy guiding because he wants to advance his political ambitions. I checked the source out very carefully. The source is highly credible, and the source is just concerned that the law is not being followed. This record should be public. That's what he says. I agree.
Jefferson Morley, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll have more Rising right after this. Elon Musk sat down with Tucker Carlson for a wide-ranging conversation. He's gone all in on Donald Trump, even showing up to stump for him this weekend in Butler, Pennsylvania, the site of the first assassination attempt against the GOP candidate. Now, one of Musk's comments has landed hard. Let's listen.
Which is like nobody's even bothering to try to kill Kamala because it's pointless. What do you achieve? Nothing.
No, it's totally
Just find
right.
another puppet.
Exactly. That's
It's no point in killing.
it's deep and true, though.
Nobody's trying to kill Joe Biden.
It's
It would be
bless you.
pointless.
Totally.
They also talked about the Jeffrey Epstein client list.
I mean, they've put like whatever, 500 or 600 January 6 protesters in prison, and not one person on the Epstein client list.
Will that ever come out, do you think?
I think part of why Kamala's getting so much support is that if Trump wins, that Epstein client list is going to become public.
Yes.
And some of those billionaires behind Kamala are terrified of that outcome.
Saw you sighing.
The world's richest man. Does he know that Donald Trump might be on that client list? Has he seen those photos? Those aren't doctored photos. I mean, this is wild. I mean, this man is so down a dark rabbit hole. Like, he's in the depths of the internet. He is QAnon.
Elon?
Yeah. If he weren't a billionaire, he probably would have stormed the Capitol himself, but he doesn't want to be in the crowd with people and actually, like, get physically involved. I mean, he basically...
You don't think there's anything to the idea that wealthy or politically connected people are hoping the Epstein client list does not become public, and that there could be complicity with top law enforcement or political aspects of law enforcement? The prosecution of Epstein in the first place, the initial one was later by a Trump appointee, was handled very softly, and he had all these connections to the Virgin Islands and to Stacey Plaskett and to Bill Gates and the Clintons and Trump. Yes, traveled on was years and years and years ago. Bank of America, very complicit with Epstein from all the emails that were released showing a warm relationship with him after the initial conviction for sex-related crimes. At least with Trump and even Bill Clinton, that was all from before. There is some plausible deniability to knowing what he was. There's no plausible deniability after he's already been arrested and prosecuted for sex crimes, and Bill Gates and Bank of America and the Virgin Islands still tried to have a relationship with him at that point.
I completely agree with you, and I think the way that you framed it is a very responsible way of framing this, because it was based on reporting. I mean, that first time that Epstein was prosecuted, there was a great southern Florida reporter who relentlessly did the work on Epstein, and he got convicted, and even after that, they still protected him. I mean, it is a protection racket in a sense that there's obviously a lot of different assumptions as to what Epstein was doing and Ghislaine Maxwell were doing, and there are endless podcasts that dig into their relationships, and Ghislaine Maxwell's father, who mysteriously died on a boat that was named after her. Yeah, it's questionable, and clearly they were warming up to the rich and the powerful, and potentially, holding information on them. On whether it was his island in the Caribbean or his home in New Mexico, that huge sprawling estate, or on the Lead Express, where he would travel across the world with people like Donald Trump and Bill Clinton. But also part of that racket is, just like Puff Daddy, Diddy, whatever, he was a legitimate producer, and he had legitimate relationships in the music industry, and there were normal hour business operations, and then there were after-hour business operations. So it is kind of a question of, well, okay, was Bill Gates involved in anything, or was he just, going to one of these conferences that Epstein would put on, where a bunch of other rich and powerful people were? I think it would be very interesting. I would love for that to break open, but I don't think Elon Musk, Elon Musk's conspiracy that Kamala's in on covering it up, more so even than Donald Trump. Get real. And let's not forget what he said about Kamala Harris. Nobody wants to. I don't even want to repeat that. I don't even want to repeat that. That's
so. But it is for all of the Democratic and mainstream media and liberal progressive people bemoaning the supposed violent rhetoric or hateful rhetoric or incendiary rhetoric that they say is coming out of the right. It is true that the victim of attempted political violence lately has been Donald Trump.
Totally.
Not Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, not top Democrats. Thank God.
They also have extra security. I mean, they get death threats every single day.
Maybe Donald Trump should have extra security too. I don't know.
I mean, they've upped it. Okay. So
yeah, after the first time,
I agree.
After the second time, they've actually upped it.
This is a bipartisan issue. You saw that hearing.
So that one guy said, well, he's at a golf course. What do you want us to do? I don't know. He's not the president. I don't know. Provide the same level of security as he is the former president running again. It's an unprecedented situation.
Right.
You should provide him with adequate security.
And it's showing the flaws in the Secret Service, which has been reported in the past that the Secret Service relies heavily on local law enforcement, and not every, local law enforcement is, as we've seen over the years, is really up to par. And imagine what happens when they go overseas. How do they interact with different governments and who have different, goals? This this is really a difficult situation, and it has bipartisan support. That hearing, I mean, AOC eviscerated the Secret Service as much as the right wing eviscerated the Secret Service. But it's not responsible speech for a CEO. For Elon Musk to say that, even Tucker Carlson felt a little uncomfortable. He was like, whoa, you're, that's like a line you don't cross.
Yeah, the phrasing was unfortunate because, and also like it's not out of the realm of question. Someone could try to assassinate her or Biden or something. No, I don't think he was asking for it. I think what he was saying, and I don't agree with how he said it, but what he was saying is that Kamala Harris is she's just a generic Democrat. We don't know what she stands for, her philosophy is. If she was replaced by one of the other leading Democratic candidates, there would be no change in philosophy or policy, or she's just a generic D, right? What is she? She doesn't. I don't know if I don't think she stands for progressive values. Maybe she secretly does. She has undone all of them, but she's pretty indistinguishable. She has no philosophy or ideology of her own. She's just purely a political operator.
Instead of saying, well, if they X'd her.
I mean, the way Elon Musk...
And he also said that about Biden, by the way.
Well, yeah, the way Elon Musk and the right views Donald Trump is that he is a unique political actor who is not replaceable.
I agree.
Just a generic Republican, right? Democrats feel that way,
I agree.
too.
He's an authoritarian, once-in-a-lifetime
well,
psychopath.
That's why... But people who are from the favorable to Donald Trump perspective think he's so at risk because he represents a challenge to the status quo, to the establishment, to the vast federal bureaucracy, to the deep state, to the bipartisan foreign policy, to all sorts of things. And so he is vulnerable because if you take him out, that vision will not be executed by any other Republican or any other political figure whatsoever. Whereas if you took out Biden or Harris, it would just be continuity. And there is something to that.
That is an argument.
And you can, even from a negative anti-Trump view, such as your own, there is something to that.
That is an argument, and that is a great argument to have. That is not what Elon Musk said, and this is the problem with Elon Musk and his circle of advisors around him and his yes men, is that no one ever tells him what to say and how to say it. Maybe that doesn't sound good, and he doesn't really read the room well.
There's something good about that.
He doesn't read the room well. No, I mean, you shouldn't just say every thought in your head. We're humans.
Well, yeah,
we
but
have
you shouldn't just
empathy and tone deaf, and it can hurt him.
recite talking points from people trying to keep you safe.
That's not what I said. Someone could say to him, hey, Elon, you sound like a moron right now, and it actually is going to hurt your bottom line. And you're actually not helping Donald Trump when you say these things. If you're going to be the king, the surrogate, even Tucker Carlson was like, ooh, I don't know how I want to handle that. And I know Tucker, and he does not hold back on anything.
All right, tell us what you think. More Rising right after this. This may be the October surprise we've all been waiting for. It turns out that Biden is not happy with Merrick Garland and how the DOJ handled his son, Hunter. In his new tell-all book, War, veteran journalist Bob Woodward offered behind-the-scenes details of President Biden's innermost thoughts. Woodward writes that Biden lamented having appointed Merrick Garland to be Attorney General. Biden is critical of Garland's handling of Hunter Biden's mounting legal woes. Woodward documents that Biden was angry over the prosecution of his son, telling an associate that he, quote, should have never picked Garland, and that this is never going to effing go away.
Woodward also dished on Donald Trump, saying he has been in constant communication with Vladimir Putin, including sending the Russian president COVID tests in 2020. According to Woodward's new book, conveniently timed to release before the election, Trump has continued his communication with Putin since leaving office, speaking to him at least 7 times. Woodward's source claims that they were ordered to leave the room as Trump spoke to Putin, and that Putin was particularly concerned about being infected by COVID at the time. Will either of these revelations change voters' minds, Robby?
Let's start with the first part. So this is interesting. So he's mad about his appointee, Merrick Garland, because Merrick Garland has taken the Hunter Biden matter with some level of seriousness. This is reminiscent of, how Trump was dissatisfied with Jeff Sessions and James Comey and, wanted greater loyalty and didn't think they should look into any sort of those things, which was a major media scandal at the time. I wonder if Biden is going to be treated by the media in similarly oh, how dare you have contempt for the independent judicial process? I'm betting not, but it is very interesting.
I think that they'll probably take it seriously. The difference is Donald Trump just outwardly said those things about Jeff Sessions, whereas this is through sources in Woodward's book. And Woodward, obviously, Bob Woodward is an icon, and I assume he's taking all the caution in terms of his sourcing. And he has publishers who I hope are taking that seriously too. But there is a lot of sourcing in here. I mean, it's not just the Merrick Garland. There are quotes in this book supposedly that Joe Biden was using inappropriate language when referring to not only Vladimir Putin but Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah.
He supposedly calls Benjamin Netanyahu to his face a rogue actor and a liar, an effing liar. Donald Trump, the fact that there are sources within the White House at the time that state that Donald Trump would frequently have conversations with Vladimir Putin, and that Vladimir Putin told him not to talk about the COVID.
I want to get, and I do want to get to that in a minute, but one more thing on that. So I don't care that Biden used, expletives or whatever, that's fine.
I kind of love it, actually.
But so he said all these things about Netanyahu, but again, the Israeli policy is very supportive of Netanyahu, so I just don't get it. It's if in private he hates Netanyahu and doesn't want to help him out anymore, but publicly feels compelled to, I just don't understand it.
I don't understand it either, and I think this is the frustration. That this isn't the first time people have come out and said that Joe Biden does not like Benjamin. He's basically said it himself when he's been asked on the trail, that he was frustrated with Benjamin Netanyahu, and that is much lighter language.
Yeah.
My only thought is maybe he's putting pressure on other allies to withdraw funding of weapons because it is a U.S. policy. It is not a it is not a Joe Biden policy. Bernie Sanders could be elected tomorrow, and I think at the end of the day, the U.S. policy is always to stand with Israel, just as France's policy is to stand with America, United States, when Donald Trump is president. I believe that might be his mindset. I don't agree with it. You don't agree with it. This is out of control. He's a rogue actor. He himself is a terrorist at this point, and he needs to be a little bit more aggressive.
That's akin to what Kamala said on, 60 Minutes the other day, when she said, she wouldn't say she's an ally of Netanyahu. She would only say she's an ally of Israel. So, okay, on the Russia stuff, I also found it, again, we will get to Trump, but the Biden administration, according to Woodward, thought that a nuclear strike by Russia on Ukraine had a 50% likelihood. To me, that is just wrong and crazy. I don't think there was. I think there's maybe a slight chance. Do I think there was? It was just as likely as not that Russia was going to use a nuclear weapon. That worries me if it's indicative and reflective of U.S. national security's view of this conflict, that the stakes are that high and existential. I don't think that is calibrated to the actual level of risk of Russia inaugurating a nuclear World War III-esque conflict. I don't think that's at all realistic, and if those are the people making these national security assessments, I have serious questions about their credibility and their judgment. Okay, that said, let's talk about Trump. So he has communicated with Vladimir Putin. That's, whatever. The COVID part is a little interesting. Putin was very afraid of COVID, and I guess was able to get tests. And why I see that could be a scandal is that, if you remember the COVID tests very early on, there was a dramatic failure of the CDC because they centralized the testing. They forbid private companies from making their own tests. They forbid those, and they said, no, these are the tests, and then those tests were bad. They screwed up. So there was a testing shortage for American citizens at the time that I guess we sent some to Putin. Obviously, I want to foster good relations even with countries that we are antagonistic toward, so I don't have any problem with doing that in a vacuum, but I understand why people might be upset given the testing was so limited.
And that he was calling in a favor. I mean, this is a country that is a leader that's been adversarial. Even at the time under Trump, he was adversarial to different, let's say, divisions in the United States, not just political, but departments. It is mind-boggling that this man, Donald Trump, was having these kinds of conversations privately. And okay, that's not unusual in a presidency. We've all listened to the Nixon tapes. We know how this goes down. But this is also Donald Trump, who was a COVID denier at the time in many ways, and it became a political scandal for him. And he was meanwhile having conversations with Vladimir Putin, who, remember those photos of him having meetings with his advisors, and he was like on the other end of a very long table because he didn't want to be near anybody. There were also rumors that he wasn't well, that he was struggling with an illness, a mysterious illness, potentially cancer. There were conversations about he was having some mental decision-making issues at the time. So maybe that is also why the 50% chance of nuclear reaction was taken into consideration. I mean, there's so much that we don't know that intelligence knows, and that is part of this report, too.
I know, but I don't trust them, and I don't believe them. There's no way it was a coin flip for whether nukes were about to start flying. Nukes didn't end up flying. The closest we've come to nuclear war, all-out nuclear war, was, over the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that still wasn't even a coin flip. The only one who's actually ever used nukes aggressively was the United States at the very end of World War II. We got to be realistic about the actual risks out there because it affects our own decision making. Like, if we're operating from the standpoint that it's a coin flip whether Russia uses nukes, then obviously we're going to be more aggressive and more hawkish.
And he was. He said that supposedly. Okay, everything, of course, is based on quotes. That worries
me about us.
I agree. I completely agree with you. If this is exactly the same, a source inside the White House is still somebody who's witnessing a conversation, and that's still hearsay.
Yeah, reliance on anonymous sources by the mainstream media goes way too far in my view. Say it on the record or don't say it is honestly the view we've gotten. Journalists, mainstream media organizations, all media, I'm not singling out a specific organization, have gotten way more comfortable just letting staffers vent their frustrations with their workplaces without any accountability or any of the kind of mechanisms for, like, if you're willing to say it on the record. Usually, we used to only offer those. It was true of both the Trump White House and the Biden White House. People just kind of mad about their working situation, venting about it, being allowed to do that. We used to say that was only acceptable in rare national security cases where the person's life might be endangered. We've now just said anybody can say anything about anyone and we'll print it. And
no, I totally agree with you. And even with those sources, you still had to verify in other ways.
But Woodward is a well-respected journalist, obviously with a long history. So
I'm still going to read it.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to read it.
Will it impact the election?
I don't know if it'll. I don't know. I mean, again,
the scientists are looking at
some is not ideal stuff about both Biden and Trump, I would say. I guess Biden's not even the candidate, right? It's Kamala Harris because of everything that's happened.
But he didn't have enough time to report that. Maybe there's an addendum at the front of the book.
There has not been enough time to do adequate reporting on Kamala Harris. On that, we agree. More Rising coming up right after this. This is a crazy one. CBS News reprimanded its top morning anchor, Tony DeCopo, over his heated interview with author Ta-Nehisi Coates over his views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Let's watch.
What is it that so particularly offends you about the existence of a Jewish state that is a Jewish safe place and not any of the other states out there?
There's nothing that offends me about a Jewish state. I am offended by the idea of states built on ethnocracy, no matter where they are.
Muslim included.
I would not want a state where any group of people lay down their citizenship rights based on ethnicity. The country of Israel is a state in which half the population exists on one tier of citizenship, and everybody else that's ruled by Israelis exists on another tier, including Palestinian Israeli citizens. The only people that exist on that first tier are Israeli Jews. Why do we support that? Why is that okay? I'm the child of Jim Crow. I'm the child of people that were born into a country where that was exactly the case of American apartheid. I walk over there and I walk through the occupied territories and I walk down a street in Hebron. And a guy says to me, I can't walk down the street unless I profess my religion. I'm with another path. No. I want to. This is very, very important.
It is important. It is
extremely important.
Yeah, lay it down.
I'm working with the person that is guiding me is a Palestinian whose father, whose grandfather and grandmother was born in this town. And I have more freedom to walk than he does.
Why is there no agency in this book for the Palestinians? They exist in your narrative merely as victims of the Israelis, as though they were not offered peace at any juncture, as though they don't have a stake in this as well. What is their role in the lack of a Palestinian?
I have a very, 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 very moral compass about this. And again, perhaps it's because of my ancestry. Either apartheid is right or it's wrong.
The Star anchor, who is Jewish, was admonished on Monday on the one-year anniversary of the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel. Coates has been stirring up controversy as he goes on tour for his new book, The Message. Coates compares Israel's treatment of Palestinians to apartheid and a moral crime. Coates writes, quote, "For as sure as my ancestors were born into a country where none of them was the equal of any white man, Israel was revealing itself to be a country where no Palestinian is ever the equal of any Jewish person anywhere." Let's watch another exchange.
When I read the book, I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist. And so then I found myself wondering, why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much? Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups that want to eliminate it?
So there was an eruption at CBS over this interview. The top brass said the anchor didn't meet their editorial standards. Others believed he was doing well at his job. There is a reaction to CBS and also the actions they're now taking. Editors at the Free Press wrote on Monday, how is CBS marking October 7th? By admonishing Tony DeCopel. And that's not all. Puck News reported, get this, CBS is inviting a self-described mental health expert, DEI strategist, and trauma trainer, a man by the name of Dr. Donald Grant, to moderate a conversation on this issue at a forthcoming all-staff meeting. That's the part of this that I rolled my eyes hardest at. Look, I think what happened was fine. He got harsh scrutiny from Tony DeCopel. That is the job of journalists, to do harsh scrutiny. And I thought he addressed the scrutiny he was getting. I thought Coates addressed the scrutiny just fine. You can watch that exchange and decide who you felt more, affinity for based on how they had that conversation about Israel-Palestine. And that's absolutely fine. I don't see any problem with it. I don't think there's a problem with Tony DeCopel asking those questions. I don't think there's a problem with Coates fielding them the way that he did. It's all fine. It was an example of journalism. There's nothing to be upset about. And CBS, I think it's the staff is mad, if I'm reading between the lines, it's always the staff. It's always this small number of young, this is the case, young woke people working at the company on Slack going, oh no, but my feelings are hurt because I had to watch something uncomfortable and somebody was actually challenged who I like, and oh no, I'm so whiny and sad about it. We need DEI, we need therapy, we need trauma dogs, we need everything. That's what's happening.
Yeah, that's a
stupid,
very weird response to the outrage. I watched this in real time, and full disclosure, I used to work for CBS. I think that they have very strict standards, and over the years, especially with less movies leaving, they have been adamant about adhering to those standards, especially in light of Me Too. With that being said, okay, these two guys are friends. It's not just that they know each other. They're friends. They hang out. They have these debates. It's like, if you were coming over to my house for dinner, we might have an extension of a debate that we have for dinner on air. That's
Let me guarantee you can have very uncomfortable conversations about Israel with people you otherwise like. Our viewers know. They have seen it on the show.
Yes, and with that being said, there have been a lot of criticisms over Coates' book, just sort of like parachuting into Palestine and uncovering. And I listened to the Terry Gross interview on Fresh Air. He admits that he did not know enough about the Mideast. He admits that he went there and he was truly surprised. And I'm glad that he went there firsthand and really saw what he says is the apartheid there and the unequal treatment of Palestinians in Israel and of course obviously in Palestine. I agree with him all that. The criticism that some people are having over this book is that it was just like, because he's Ta-Nehisi Coates, this esteemed writer, suddenly he writes a book because, what so many others have been debating for years and years, centuries, is now occurring to him, and he gets to sell a bestseller book. It was fascinating. It was kind of like Dreams of My Father in a sense of his personal narrative. But also, I think that DeCopel, who is Jewish, this is, I think, a question of, do you give up your identity when you're reporting? He is a friend of his, so he can push back, and Coates pushed back very hard, as you said. And I think it was great. I think it was a great conversation. But I think the editorial question is, as a reporter, because that's what Tony DeCopel is, he's not just like a moderator or, a morning guy, he's a reporter. Does he have an obligation to pull back on his identity, as being a Jew, when interviewing on a conflict that obviously affects his own identity? That I think is the ultimate question. I thought the tone was a little weird when he said this could have been like an extremist book. That was the only part that I felt was a little bit out of.
I mean, I thought it was good journalism and it was a good moment on TV, and they don't all have to be friendly interviews, and I thought it was fun. I thought there was no story here. It was grilling about a book and a perspective, and that's fine. And I thought Coates handled himself perfectly well. Actually, I respect him more for how he didn't blow up and say, "How dare you? I'm only entitled to like a fluff or a friendly interview." No, I thought he handled himself very well. This is someone I don't otherwise agree with, or especially like I don't love the writing of. I mean, he's good at his craft. I really strongly disagree with his ideology. I thought he did great in this interview, and more power, all credit to him. I'm not upset with anyone involved in this except the lunatic crybaby staff members who complain every time an actual example of journalism occurs because they think it should just be this emotional safe space. So they're entitled to extend their emotional safe space into the entire workplace, even a workplace where part of the product of the organization is sometimes confrontational interviews. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Not every single time. You can interview your friends and have it just be nice too. That's fine. But some of the time, that's the way it's supposed to be. And they're big mad about it. And they're going to bring in a DEI consultant. By the way, I've seen allegations that this guy's kind of a whack job. The DEI person I noted. But I would love if it would be. I think it should be Matt Walsh in disguise. Would be the hilarious thing to me. That would be so
It's not
great.
like one of those projects that you guys all
Put his wig on, his man bun wig, and send him out there.
I think it's wild. I mean, I agree with you. They're blowing it out of proportion. You know, there are real reporters that have real problems, and those are the ones who I think we should be calling into question.
Yeah.
We're not solving it today.
That does it for us today on Rising. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.